Another week and another set of store showdowns. Now, I was able to attend the one we're going to be talking about. No spoilers, we'll get to that. But there were a lot of cool things that showed up. This time, the event was held at Alternate Universes down in Wilmington, Delaware. Now, this is the first time that I was at the store. Definitely a cool place. Check it out. And to be honest, I may be able to maybe I'll have to rearrange my schedule and hit up their locals because it was a way easier drive to get to it than I thought it was going to be. But it was also a lot of fun, met a whole bunch of new people, and of course, played a lot of Star Wars. So let's talk about the actual lists and the event as a whole. Now, as mentioned, this was at Alternate Universes. You probably heard that name a few times by now because, well, they have 3 locations. And at the time of this recording, we're leading into their next store showdown at the 3rd one at Bluebell. There's a couple of showdowns going on this weekend, as we've been blessed in the area with a whole lot of them. But this particular one had 20 participants. Of course, that means 5 rounds of Swiss. We cut to top 8. And, well, a little bit of a spoiler. I did top 8, and I was actually first in the Swiss. When we get to first place, we'll have a different story to tell. But let's actually talk about the decks that did perform well at this event. So with this particular event, we actually had 20 players, of course, resulting in 5 rounds of Swiss. After the cut, we had, I think, a pretty decent cross-section of the field participating in top 8. And you're going to see here that what the breakdown was for that. And personally, spoiler alert, I will get a little bit out of the way. I was first place going into top 8, and I played a whole bunch of these people. So it was not an easy road. And shout out to all the competitors, but especially, of course, our top 8 competitors, because they fought through some fierce competition and played incredibly well. Now, before we move into the deck list, I will say that I am going to be trying to stream more Star Wars content. I'm hoping that I can get a streaming setup that I can bring to some of these stores. But let me know what you'd like to see down in the comments. Of course, the link for my Twitch stream and everything else is in the description, down about the like and subscribe button. Got to get those in. But let's transition and take a peek at the top 8 deck lists. Now, we're doing it a little bit different this time. I'm actually going to be putting up the pictures that the event took, that the organizers, the employees took after the event. But before we get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out. They did put in some effort, so I want to make sure we use the pictures. It also saves me a little bit of effort of loading everything into SWODB. But this was a picture from, I believe, round 2. So you can see some of our competitors, a number of those people at that table did top 8. And as I alluded to earlier, you see that clown boat, that absolute goon with the black shirt and the white hat? Yeah, that's me. That's me. You can kind of tell from the playmat. But yeah, let's actually get to the important part. So in 8th place, we have Red Sabine. This is a list that's been going around for a while, and I was talking to the pilot, one of the people that I played on my way to my own top 8 berth. This is a list that seems really cool. It definitely feels very well positioned as far as dealing with the various blue control decks. Based on the way that I think that the top 8 broke down, I believe this player, and if they're out there in the comments, let me know. Correct me if any of this is incorrect. I believe they were eliminated by the Palpatine player, which is a list we'll see in a moment. Now, I was able to take a round off of them because I think Yellow Boba is just favored into this matchup. But as mentioned, I think this list is very strong and something that I want to mess around with as soon as I can get my hands on Aggression, which is really the reason to play this deck, right? It allows you to one-shot Childsons using 2 of the modes. It allows you to continue to apply the usual Sabine pressure thanks to K2SO, as well as For a Cause I believe in, and of course, Sabine herself. Now, one of the other wrinkles naturally is Tarkin Town, another way for you to maybe not cleanly, but more cleanly remove a Childson. And clearly this player was anticipating control, leaning into the full set of Heroic Sacrifice in the main board, as well as full set of Spec Ops Soldier. This means that Childson has an enormous road to hoe because that's a lot of pressure. Only 2 Saw Gerrera, which is interesting. It's another card that I feel is a reason to play the deck. So I did talk to them briefly after our round about the Guerrilla attack pods on the board, but I didn't really ask them about the Saw all that much. So again, If you're watching this, feel free to drop your own thoughts. I like this list a lot. Like I said, I do want to try it myself. It looks really cool. It looks like a lot of fun. And we've been struggling, my wife and I, with green Sabine lately. So yellow and red, more spoilers, but yellow and red Sabine are things we absolutely want to take a look at. One last comment. Does feature the Rebel Pathfinder main deck. Little bit of extra Saboteur to either sneak past or, of course, maybe eliminate, I guess, like Crafty Smuggler. I don't know. Like, you're probably going face. I'm struggling to come up with other reasons why you would run into things, but maybe it's here or there. But either way, definitely a cool list. Next up is Blue Han. Now, one thing I didn't comment on before when I was saying that the staff was taking the pictures, they do have that sideboard card there, which I thought was cool to help identify. Otherwise, it's just kind of like a mess of stuff on the table. And I appreciate them doing this in general. So again, shout out to AU. But here we have a Blue Han list that is including a bunch of spice, at least in my opinion. I know Blue Han is kind of on the rise, but I haven't seen it around all that much. It's absolutely been Green Han as far as the eye can see, except for, well, what you use your eyes to see here. Notably, if you look down towards the bottom, we have Jedi lightsabers featured alongside Force Throws and Spark of Rebellion. Now, there's a lot of things here that may throw you off. It's like, well, why are you running these out of aspect things? Why are these things happening? Why is that in there? There's a lot of cool scenarios that are enabled because you have access to these tools. I talked about it a little bit in one of the previous breakdowns, but Jedi lightsaber on leaders, or of course, in this case, maybe Kanan Jarruk, allows you to just cleanly remove things like, I don't know, a Boba Fett leader. I've heard those are okay. They seem all right, so it's kind of a big deal. Similarly, Force Throw, pitching a redemption means kablamo, a lot of leaders just implode on the spot. And that could be a big deal because the way the game is structured, your leader turn is your turn. Like, it is the thing that your deck does. And when it gets thrown off the rails, all of a sudden the deck doesn't look so great. You don't get those Boba on tap turns. For other Han decks, if Han doesn't get to ramp, you can really disrupt your opponent in a crippling way. So I like the addition of these things. The Spark of Rebellions seem to be great in a ton of matchups. Even against aggro, you'll occasionally find value if you can squeeze it in because, hey, take a For a Cause I Believe in, take a Cunning, take a this, take a that. It's probably not going to survive the post-board transition in those matchups. Maybe it does. I haven't played the deck, but I would imagine that it comes out for devotions and similar things along those lines. However, speaking of sideboard, you also have Bodhi Rook to supplement the sparks in the main deck, and of course, Force Throw as well. So you have a pretty substantial discard package into other mid-range and slower decks, getting that disruption element coming in. I was able to also play against this player. I was able to just tempo them out. I'd be curious how their other general aggro feeling is. We talked a little bit after the game, and it sounded as though if they are able to get the turn 1 Falcon to eat your space unit, or especially turn 1 Yoda to just pull way ahead, they kind of had, I don't want to call it cakewalk scenarios, but they felt it was very, very strong, and I can absolutely agree with that. I've lost plenty of games to various Han lists where it was a turn 1 Ezra or a turn 1 Falcon. I haven't seen, because I haven't played against Blue Han, of course, I wasn't seeing too many turn 1 Yodas, but that seems super scary, trying to dig yourself out of that restore hole where your opponent just, they're forever healing. And Yoda's not exactly the easiest unit to remove if you don't have certain combinations of cards. Clearly, post-board, the devotions come in against aggro. The redemption I'm a little curious about because I've seen a lot of people lean into a Hail Mary play against aggro with the redemption and be like, well, I'll redemption, heal a bunch, but then I'm able to either clear a path, continue pressure, whatever. So I'm curious whether that comes in against aggro or is that more intended for control? I would imagine aggro, but you can tell by the inflection in my voice, there's a question mark on the end of that statement. Either way, this is a really cool list. Like I said, I have been hearing rumors that it is on the rise, so I'm probably going to have to get more reps in because it clearly did well, and shout out to our 7th place finisher. Now, in sixth place, we have a regular that I've been seeing and going up against in a number of the other showdowns and 1Ks and things like that. We have a green Vader list here, and I did not get to play against them, but it's something that I actually want to play myself. In fact, it is the next thing on my list if I can ever get the cards. I know a lot of people are probably thinking the same thing, but Vader ramp seems like a lot of fun. The idea of just slamming Star Destroyers turn after turn after turn, or it's Vader into Palpatine, or Vader into Palpatine into Reinforcement Walker, or whatever the case may be, seems like it's really cool. And of course, oh, by the way, Overwhelming Barrage does Overwhelming Barrage things. Now, in the board, there is a bunch of spice, but don't get, we're going to talk about that in a second. More about the main board, there is a cheeky recruit here, which I do like. It allows you to dig for some more gas. In other games, when I played ramp builds, that's often the sticking point. It's, oh, I'm ramped and ready to go. What did I draw? Another ramp card. All right, I'm okay. I got another turn. What did I draw? Another ramp card or a blank, or some of your early game stuff where it's, I'm ramped up and ready to go. I can't find the gas to actually put the game away. Recruit gives you that kind of an extra copy of certain things to a degree, at the very least. Now, I don't know all of their matchups on the day because we were discussing it in between rounds a little bit, just catching up and seeing how everybody was doing. I always like to check in with all my opponents as they're going on, just to see how people are doing. It's like, hey, you had this cool list. How did you do? In this case, it wasn't one of my opponents as mentioned, but it is pretty cool to talk to people and get their insights. So I definitely recommend, go make some friends and talk to people at events. But it was cool hearing from him about how they felt about particular matchups. And I'm excited to try this. Like I said, I want to see how this does for myself with my own two eyes, two hands shuffling it up, whatever way you want to describe it. But as mentioned, let's get to the sideboard. We got some Disabling Fang Fighters. We got the Relentless. We got Colonel Yularen, which I think has been steadily making its way into more main decks, so it's interesting to see that it's in the board here. But notably, there's Escort Skiffs and Forced Surrenders, which I think is really cool. Escort Skiffs, of course, coming in for a little bit extra ambush to try and stabilize aggro matchups. Forced Surrender allowing for a larger, well, I guess it's the only part of the discard package here. Some other versions may be, excuse me, running other things like Force Throw or something like that. But a unique list heavily leaning into the Imperial idea because we also have TIE Fighters swapping back to the main deck for a little bit. There's a lot of things that Vader can hit. You're almost never going to whiff on this. I definitely love to hear from the pilots, see how they felt it went and what other changes they would make. But again, congratulations. Hey, you remember that jerk from the beginning that was in the picture that I was pointing out? Yeah, that's me. It is here, 5th place. I keep getting these top 8s, but I can't quite close the deal. So I was trying to, because I wasn't sure exactly how these pictures are going to look, I was trying to separate sideboard up in the top, and obviously this is not really organized. I'll admit my blood sugar was kind of getting low after a long day, so I was just kind of like putting stuff out there, and I really wanted to get something to eat. This is the same list that I've been running. There aren't any variations in this particular one. I have been considering, because my elimination in top 8 was against Blue Iden, and my only loss in Swiss was in round 5 against the Palpatine deck. Now, I think the Palpatine deck, I don't believe that I made a misplay in game 2. I crushed them in game 1. Game 2, I lost a very close one, like they were at 29 for a few turns. And then I just couldn't find a fire spray or something to close the game. And then the third game wasn't even really close. So I'm sure there was something I could have done different. Would it have been a misplay to do something different? Possibly. I'm not sure. But in conjunction with the loss to Iden, which personally I feel is, it's not 100-0, but it feels like it. I can tell you that much. I want to try and include some more 1-drops. The reason being is try to be a little more explosive in the early game, try and dodge the power of the dark sides and things. You aren't truly dodging them, but if they spend a turn to, say you play Greedo and TIE Fighter LM, they power the dark side and kill one of them, obviously. then or they make an opening, kill one of them. The other one lives. And you can continue to pressure at least a little bit. It sounds insignificant, but at the end of the day, if you'd rather have a board, even if it's a TIE fighter, than have no board. And that's kind of the position I was in. I'm still, as always, underwhelmed by Jabba. I know people love it, but I just kind of don't. One other thing that I'm debating, and I'm not really sold on this, is Gamorrean Guards. Obviously spectacular against Sabine. I'm never really thrilled with it against anything else. Maybe that's a slot to play around with. I'm not really sure, but you've probably seen this list 1,000 times at this point, and I keep saying I want to do a video about it. I keep waiting to actually win one of these because then it'll feel better. But if you want to see the video, let me know down in the comments and maybe I'll just do it, because at this point I've had 4 top 8s. 4? Something like that. Like 4 top 8s and just can't, every time something's getting me. But that's the way it goes. Now, way more organized than me is our Yellow Sabine player. I also played them, excuse me, in the Swiss rounds. I was fortunate enough to take it, but it was my first game loss in the Swiss at that point in time, as well as I just want to say that they played it extremely well. Like, they knew what they were doing and what they needed to achieve. Truth be told, I just got lucky and hit multiple cunnings. Like, it's a card game. It happens sometimes, but they played it exceptionally well and probably deserved it way more than I did, given that I won on luck. But regardless, talking about the actual list, there's an enormous amount of 3-ofs here, as you would expect. Notably, it's the Liberator gunship that is the 2-of, the 1-off Chewbacca, the sideboard Disabling Fang Fighters, Wolf, Gorilla Attack Pod, Spark of Rebellions, all make sense. Interestingly enough, and this kind of goes back to the Han discussion earlier and some of these other decks that are running Spark of Rebellion, this player did in fact board in the Sparks against me because Cunning is such a crippling play, and I don't think people should be surprised to see Sparks showing up in basically, I mean, there's an argument that it could come out of any deck, aside from the way the rules generally work. Tons of, if you're in Hero Yellow, it's definitely a consideration because it's so cheap. And if you're not, it's still probably going to be cheap enough if you have to ensure that, hey, I can't allow them to play insert card. I can't have that happen because if it does, I lose. Well, here's your hypothetical answer. If you can set up the initiative, if you can set up the sequencing, you're in a good position to lock them out by taking those tools away. Now, as the overall list, I mean, this seems fairly standard as far as I can tell. We do have 2 sneak attacks in there. You can see them just above the 4 calls I believe in. Also, shout out to the signed Showcase Sabine. That was pretty sweet. Little intimidation factor when you sit down against something that's that cool, right? But overall, I think this is positioned pretty well, similar to the red Sabine list, because it does, air quotes, the same thing as Green Bean, but presents some unique wrinkles that can absolutely throw your opponent off, because while tons of people are probably jamming dozens of games against Green Sabine, you sit down with Yellow, they're going to have to go a little bit into the tank to try and figure out, how do I actually contest some of these other threats, or what do I do when my removal's stripped away by Spark of Rebellion? Now, this was obviously a top 4 list, so that means that one of the other, spoiler alert, control decks was able to eliminate it. I didn't get to watch those games, so I'd be curious how that played out. Was it just poor variance or something? Because you'd think that Sabine should crush through these, but either way, congratulations. And again, the match we played, like, I'll be honest, I think they deserved it more than I did. Although I could say that about just about everybody I played. I think everybody there was an amazing player, and I just kind of got very lucky. All right, 3rd place. Now, 3rd place was my only loss in the Swiss. This was Green Palpatine. For some reason, leading up to this event on Carabas this week, or this past week, there was a ton of Green Palpatine, or Blue Palpatine, excuse me. Obviously, Green Palpatine. And I'll be honest, I was crushing it, but it did not go that way. did not go that way in this particular game. The main board seems fairly standard. You could debate about maybe the traitorous being in there or not. Notably, there's only 2 overwhelming barrage, which I didn't know at the time, but I would love to know why there's only 2. It's debatable, I guess, that maybe you feel that you don't have a board often enough to be able to barrage, but just the threat of barrage means that your opponent has to respect it. And maybe that's what they're playing into, that, hey, if my opponent's going to play around barrage, I don't have to actually have the barrage. However, I think in the matchups where you want it, no, you have to have the barrage. So I'd love to hear from this player and find out why they went that route. Now, the 3 regional governors, I call them out every time. I really don't like this card. I think it did annoy me in one game, but I don't know how much of an impact it ultimately had. But it does notably provide another blue body for Cargo Juggernaut. So even if we assume that regional governor is not good, and I'm not saying that it's bad or that they're incorrect for using it, but even if you make that assumption that that is true, it at the very least gives you yet another body, and notably a cheap one, to combine with Cargo Juggernaut to help stabilize in whatever matchup. Key point here, no restocks or any other control mirror sort of things outside of the vigilance. So it's an interesting take on this. Also, 2 Avengers main deck. I could kind of get behind that. That could also, I know for me personally, I only have 2. So when I run these decks, it's only going to be 2 Avengers. And then, well, when it was Blue Vader, it was 3 extra Palpatine in place of it. But other than that, I think most of this makes sense. Of course, you have the early stabilization from whether it's Power of the Dark Side, Death Troopers, or even Entrenched to try and lock things down until Child Sin, although admittedly that's still early in the game. 30 health base. We were joking about players running 25 health bases, and I haven't seen too much of that with Palpatine, but I wouldn't recommend it. It was somewhat trivial to get to 25. The last 5 points of health was where it was really a challenge. Now, the sideboard clearly prepared for control, double Devastator, triple Relentless, and Maudis. The Maudis allow for some potential wombos where you can kill your own Maudie with whatever, and then untap, say, a Vader, push for a bunch of damage, or whatever you happen to target. You don't necessarily have the easy out, or as easy of an out as with Vader Leader, except I guess you kind of do with Palpatine Leader. You can eat the Maudie, untap something, continue the chain, and just pressure for a lot of damage. Without lightsabers or something, I guess you're not necessarily representing the, oops, I did 30 plus damage in a single turn, but you can put an enormous amount of pressure on in a short period of time. So definitely a cool inclusion. This is another thing that I'd love to hear from them about what the sideboarding strategy was. Now, the last card in the sideboard is something that is notably absent from the main board, and that's Super Laser Blast. I get the sense that this is probably a combination of they know people are going to play around it, so do I really need it game 1? There's no way they're going to know that I don't have it game 1 because we weren't doing open deck lists here. And it also can be somewhat of a dead card in, surprisingly, for a Wrath effect, in aggro matchups. The game kind of ends before then. There are absolutely scenarios where the aggro deck has a huge board and you're about to stabilize, and if you could just clear it, you would turn the game around. But in a lot of cases, you've either stabilized by the time Super Laser Blast is available, or you're never going to stabilize, even if you're able to Super Laser Blast. So it's kind of interesting to see them in the board, and I'm not sure if this is a common evolution for Palpatine decks or not. So if you're a Palpatine player, let me know, because this is intriguing to me. Moving on to our finalists, we got a little blue-eyed in action. Shout out to this player. They absolutely just ruffle stomped me. Like it was not close. It was not close. I think this is a really bad matchup for Bobby Yellow. So if that's running amok, give it a shot. Notably, this is, and depending on how the matchups played out for top 4, I'm a little more confident about how they played out and what the matchups were for top 8. But top 4 was after I was already gone, so obviously wasn't, because like I said, I needed to eat. So this one seems to be way better position for the control mirrors. And in this top 8, based on what I'm assuming the matchups were, it definitely makes sense that it was able to get to the finals. Pilot was great, and they were well prepared. You got Sparks in the main. You got triple Search Your Feelings in the main. Notably, also 2 restocks up there in the corner. That's a big deal for these control mirrors. You do, of course, have the tools to deal with aggro, and I need to test more with various things into Blue Iden to find out where the gaps are, because the armor seems pretty strong. I'm not going to lie. I can understand newer players' frustration. I've been doing this for 30 years. Yeah, it's been 30 years now. I've been playing card games for 30 years, and I've played against a lot of control decks, and I do enjoy playing against them because of the challenges they present. But I can understand why I play my guy. I get to do something. No, actually you don't, because I'm going to brutally murder it. Oh, and by the way, I'll probably heal or do some other thing that also feels unfair. I can understand why some newer players, because a lot of people are onboarding with Star Wars Unlimited, they're not quite thrilled about these sort of decks. But either way, Pilot definitely was able to handle it very well, and they knew what they needed when they needed. Sideboard, we're getting an additional restock, some devotions, make an opening, bounty hunter crew, and then mission briefing. You can kind of see, due to the rows, so shout out to them for organizing it this way. Obviously, make an opening and devotion, great against aggro, and then bounty hunter crew, mission briefing, and restock come in against control. I'm still unsure if the mission briefing is intended to just be an additional mill tool in those matchups, because that's what I'm imagining, but I'm not 100% sure. So some Blue Iden player correct me on this, because this is now 2 weeks in a row that we've seen this. Either way, this list is probably not going away. Some variation of this will exist in set 2. Like, it's going to happen. Super Laser Blast is going to be a card for a long time. Unless aggro suddenly becomes so fast that Super Laser Blast is completely irrelevant, and I kind of doubt that, or that Avenger and these other cards are unplayable, then you got to be prepared for these sort of decks to exist. The cards are just that powerful. But shout out to our second place finisher here. So here is our winner. Congratulations to them. We're going to pull up their deck list alongside it. I wanted to put them up because the AU team went out of their way to take a picture of our champion. So congratulations, champion. So here is the Blue Thrawn list. This is something that absolutely set a few Discords aflame, we'll say, on fire. Exciting a lot of people. Now, I mentioned a few weeks ago when I played at the 7th Dimension Store Showdown that there was a yellow Iden list that I didn't get the exact deck list, but it felt pretty similar to this. It's definitely running, and here's the big thing, Cunning's in here alongside Vigilance. Yes, they both cost 6, but Cunning is an enormous, not quite board reset, but you basically time walk your opponent. You tap their leader, you tap another unit, or exhaust, excuse me, and then bounce another one. Odds are that's their entire board, almost independent of whatever deck it is, and then you're now that much closer to a Super Laser Blast to completely stabilize, because of course your opponent's going to feel pressured to recommit to the board once again the following turn in order to try and make up for lost time. Additionally, this is also running to Search Your Feelings in the main deck. We've got Restock main deck. We have all the usual things in terms of, Entrenched and I Am Your Father, Empower the Dark Side, and Cargo Juggernauts. But it is teched even further for the mirror, aside from the restocks and the Search Your Feelings. We get the Spark of Rebellions. We also have Bounty Hunter Crew main deck, which has, if you watch other content creators, I think it was Tower Number 9 most recently, has been pointing out that this is showing up with much more prevalence because it allows you to have that body, so it's hypothetically a threat, pressuring their life total, as well as recurring important tools that may have been stripped away by your opponent's spark of rebellion or vigilance or whatever. Gives you an extra leg up into these control mirrors. Now, I actually played against a Thrawn at locals, different player, during this week, and it was uncomfortable. Like, Thrawn is surprisingly obnoxious. It's something that I want to keep an eye on going forward. It's definitely a cool idea, utilizing these different assets in different lists. One other thing I'll point out for the main list, full set of No Good to Me Dead. Absolutely crippling when I played Boba. Being able to No Good to Me Dead on, say, an opposing Boba, an opposing Han, a number of other things, you can absolutely just crush someone's setup. On top of it, in this deck, because you're just buying time, you can get a quote-unquote free tap with Thrawn. Then you get the No Good to Me Dead, and you may be locking down a significant portion of their board since you're removing the rest of it. There's a lot of ways to just slow your opponent down and then, oops, super laser blast and surprise you're dead. Because the Avenger's going to come down and you're effectively locked out of the game. If not literally, then pretty close. Now, out of the board, we do have extra devotions, help shore up that aggro matchup, but then the rest of it really is to ensure that you're not losing the control mirror. Triple Devastator, restock, Bodhi's, Chimera for additional discard. So now we have 3 Spark of Rebellion, 2 Bodhi's, and Chimera. Like, that's a lot. Finishing it up with an additional Vanquish. Now, you do have to pay extra for the Devastators, which is interesting that they went with Devastator rather than, say, Relentless. It's kind of spicy to have those because you're paying for the out-of-aspect cost. So I'd be curious how well those worked out. So, winner, if you're out there, if you're interested in talking about the list, we'd love to have you on to do an interview. This was really cool. It's exciting to see all these different lists perform so well. And once again, shout out to all the top 8 finishers. So that's it. That was this weekend Showdown. I know there were some others going on. I'm trying to get details about those. If you have any, hit me up in Discord. The link for that, of course, is in the description. Where you can find a live stream, like and subscribe. We already did all that stuff. You know the deal by now. If you're interested in other Star Wars Unlimited content, whether it's deck breakdowns, gameplay, whatever, let me know what you're interested in. I'm trying to expand what I'm working on because as I'm learning the game, trying to understand more about the game, I like talking about the game, and you can probably tell I just talk anyway. So I run my mouth a lot. I'm very loud. It's the way it goes. But that's going to do it for this one. Once again, shout out to all the players, especially the top 8 finishers and our winner, and as well, alternate universes for hosting. But that's going to do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and tune in next time for more Random Slots.